The books of Ezra, which is what we're reading now, and Nehemiah, which is going to come shortly, are the last two of the historical books in the Old Testament. They deal with Old Testament times, which is about 538 BC to about 400 years BC. And they deal primarily with the end of the Babylonian captivity insofar as some of the Israelites were concerned, and the rebuilding of the temple and resettling of Jerusalem and the cities, some of the cities at least, of Judah. And Jeremiah prophesied, we'll see that when we get to Jeremiah, that the Babylonian captivity would last about 70 years, and that Cyrus, who was the Persian emperor, and although it was the Babylonian captivity, Persia conquered Babylon, and Cyrus was the Persian leader, and he had no problem one way or the other with the Jews. But he learned that they had a temple, and he believed that there was a God, and so he made it possible for them to go back to build the temple to the God that he believed in and that he knew they believed in. And he made a proclamation that anybody who wanted to go back to build it could, and about 50,000 of the Jews volunteered to go back. There were many more of them that decided to stay in Babylon. They were becoming culturally identified. They had intermarried, all kinds of situations that come up where many of them just decided, they were better off in Babylon than they were in Jerusalem and Judah and whatnot. That was where they wanted to stay. They decided some of them decided they liked the Babylonian gods, the Ishtar Gate, all the rest of the stuff. It was the big city. It was the big time. It was the New York, Tokyo, whatever, London of its day. And they decided that they wanted to stay there rather than go to the backwater Jerusalem, I guess. Some of them did. We see in here that there's a fellow named Sheshbazzar, and he's appointed governor. And then we see Zerubbabel is another fellow appointed governor of Judah, the area when they go back. And we're not really sure whether or not these are two separate names for the same man. The evidence tends to point that it is two people, that Sheshbazzar is the older of the two, and for some reason he is a prince of Judah, meaning he is a well-known leader of the people. Zerubbabel, on the other hand, was a descendant of Jehoiakim, who was one of the kings of Judah, one of the horrible kings of Judah, as a matter of fact. But Zerubbabel was a descendant of Jesus, and he was appointed also, apparently, governor, co-governor, maybe governor for certain things. Maybe we're not really sure exactly how it ironed out. Maybe one had principal responsibility for making sure the temple was built, and the other one was looking after the administrative affairs of the colony of the people. There was another individual that was called Jeshua, Jeshua, which also was spelt Joshua, Joshua. He was the Levitical high priest, so he was the Levite who was the principal priest, and he and Zerubbabel together directed the rebuilding of the temple, which had been demolished by the Babylonians. The Nethinims is a name that nobody's ever really seen too frequently before. Nethinims comes from a Hebrew word that means given or appointed. And these were the people who were the servants to the Levites, who were the people that looked after the sacrifices and things. so that all the things that the Levites would need were looked after. They're sort of their worldly needs were like, the meals would be prepared, their clothing would be washed and getting ready. I mean, if you're doing sacrifices of slaughtering animals, you're going to get pretty dirty pretty fast. And so they needed some assistance, and so the Nethinims were the people who actually were the help for them. Now, at the end, it talks about reckoning their genealogy, and that was super important to the Jews. We've sort of skipped over 1st and 2nd Chronicles. I've skipped them over. We'll get back to them, but I just wanted to go from the end of 2nd Kings on to Ezra, because 1st and 2nd Chronicles are genealogies and names and histories, and most people don't even read those. But for the Jews, the genealogy was so critically important that if you couldn't reckon your genealogy, there were some other things that you couldn't do. For example, what had happened is in the 70 years that they had been in Babylon, some of the Levites had intermarried with some of the Babylonians. So they would have had Babylonian wives, for instance, or they would whatever. And that being the case, then the children of that marriage would be considered polluted by the Jews, who were only supposed to marry within the covenant. And that kept the bloodline and the genealogy pure, and that would authorize them, if they were pure, unadulterated, to serve in the temple. But if you were part Jewish and part heathen ancestry, and you couldn't find your genealogy, couldn't prove your genealogy was pure, who your mother was Jewish, who your father was Jewish, who your grandfather and your great-grandfather and all the rest all of them were Jewish. If you couldn't prove that, then you were welcome to go back and live with everybody else, but you were not permitted to participate as a Levite in the temple ordinances. And that's what reckoning the genealogy was for. Now, there's one other title, Tershatha, if I remember correctly. I think that was what it was. That was the title given to the governor of Judah under the Persians. So that would have been, instead of calling him the governor, you would have called him the Tershatha or something. And that's where that name comes from. It isn't a personal name of anybody, it's a title of a position. And the first 6 chapters of Ezra are basically dealing with the temple, rebuilding of the temple, some of the challenges they had. The last 4 chapters of Ezra deal with sort of Ezra's mission and life and him as an individual. Quite an amazing situation that they had, and one that was we can learn a lot from, because a lot of times you'll face challenges in life, and that will be sort of similar sorts of things that you will face that Ezra faced with the rebuilding of with them rebuilding the temple, and his story of how they overcame the challenges that they faced.